The first thing Clarabelle noticed about the house was that it sounded too empty for a place that had buried 3 brides. The porch boards sighed under her boots, the windows stared with the dull shine of tired eyes, and the wind moved through the cottonwoods behind the barn as if it knew every name the valley no longer spoke aloud. Folks in Mercy Ridge had warned her all the way from the church to the edge of the Wheeler property. No bride ever stayed past harvest. Not in that house. Not with Elias Wheeler. But Clara arrived with one trunk. One quilt stitched by her late mother, a tin box of letters. In the silence of a woman who had lost too much, she stood on the porch, looked at the empty house, and unpacked inside. The room smelled of cedar, lamp oil, and old sorrow. There were no curtains in the front windows, no flowers on the table, no soft traces of a woman allowed to belong there. The walls were plain plank, the hearth cold, the shelves bare except for a chipped blue bowl and a Bible swollen from damp winters. Elias had gone out to the far pasture before dawn and had not come back to greet her. Which did not surprise her. He had married her with the stiff manners of a man signing for freight. Everyone knew he had lost his first wife to fever, the second to childbirth, the third to a storm that overturned a wagon on the north road. Clara touched the kitchen counter, set down her plates, folded her dresses into the pine wardrobe, and told herself a house could not scare her worse than hunger already had. By evening, she found the hidden thing no one had mentioned. Every room bore a trace of women interrupted. A thimble left on the bedroom sill, a pressed flower inside a ledger, a child-sized sock tucked behind the stove, as if each life had paused in the middle of becoming. And that was when the air changed around her, not with ghosts, but with the feeling that this place had grown used to abandonment. Clara carried water from the pump, scrubbed the kitchen floor on her knees until the wood showed its grain again, then lit a lamp in every downstairs room like a woman telling the dark it would have to share. And when Elias finally came in smelling of horse sweat and dust, he stopped in the doorway as if he had stepped into the wrong life. "You need not have bothered," he said. Clara looked at him once, then back to the stove. "I did not do it for you," she said. "I did it because I am staying. That should have been the end of it. But in Western country, nothing ends when spoken plain. It only goes quiet until trouble hears it." The next morning, the women at church pretended to smile while studying the set of Clara's shoulders. Mrs. Harlan from the general store whispered that a woman had no business trying to outstare fate. Even boys driving cattle through town turned to look at her like she was a dare someone had taken too far. And still she kept going. She patched torn shirts, salted meat, mended fence gloves, learned which gate dragged, which mare bit, which cupboard stuck in damp weather. And every evening she found one more missing softness to restore, a curtain cut from feed sacks, a sprig of sage in a jar, clean linen on the bed. Small mercies, stubborn mercies, because some women survive by fleeing, and some survive by refusing to move. Then harvest came early and mean. The wheat stood gold, but thin, the creek fell low, and the men began talking in hard voices about yield and debt. Elias worked like a man chased by something he could not shoot. Before sunrise in the fields, after dark in the barn, carrying shut-down grief in his shoulders like a yoke he had forgotten how to set aside. Clara watched him from the kitchen window and began to understand the true shape of the curse people spoke of. It was not death, not bad luck, not even the land. It was a house built around a man who did not know how to ask anyone to stay, and that was more dangerous than any ghost. One stormy night, she found a stack of letters tied with harness leather in the bottom drawer of his desk. None of them opened, all offering comfort after funerals and losses. He had read none of them, as if kindness itself had become unbearable to touch. And Clara understood then that loneliness had not happened to Elias Wheeler. He had been building it board by board when the first real trouble came. It came wearing polished boots, a silver watch chain, and a smile too smooth for honest work. Henry Voss rode in from town with papers tucked under his arm and rain promised in the west. He claimed Elias was behind on a loan taken after the second funeral, a note secured against 2 parcels of south pasture, land Elias swore he had already paid through cattle and grain over 3 full seasons. But men like Voss did not come for money, They came for weakness. For the slump of a man accustomed to surrendering what life demanded. "Sign now," Voss said, "before harvest settles the rest." Elias reached for the papers with that fatal weariness already on him. And that was the moment Clara stepped between them. Her hands still wet from bread dough. "Not 1 acre leaves this house today," she said. "Not while I can still read," Voss laughed. But Clara had been a school teacher before drought took her father's land and illness took her mother. She read every line under the bruised sky, found the false interest figure, the repeated tally, the acreage described with a boundary marker that had been moved on paper but not on land. And when she looked up, Voss was no longer smiling. "I said no," Clara repeated, softer, more dangerous. Voss folded his papers and promised to return with the sheriff, then rode off. Rain hit the porch roof like thrown nails, and Elias stood there shaking, not from cold, but from the shock of seeing someone fight for a thing he had already prepared himself to lose. That night the house felt less empty, not warmer, not easier, but awake. Clara dried the papers by the stove. Elias sat at the table and watched the fire as if waiting for judgment to step out of it. After a long while he asked why she had done it. "Because it is my land too now." "Because grief is a poor excuse for surrender," she said. Then later, when the lamp had burned low and honesty became cheaper than silence, she gave him the truth. "I know what it is to live in a room where everyone expects you to disappear. I will not help that happen again." Something moved in his face then. Not a smile, not quite sorrow, but the first crack in a wall too long mistaken for strength. He told her about Anna with the fever, Ruth and the child they could not save. June on the North Road under a sky split white with lightning. He spoke their names like breaking glass, and Clara listened. Because sometimes the nearest thing to love is being willing to hear what another person has buried alive. By dawn the valley had news. By noon it had sides. Some said Clara Belle Wheeler was reckless. Some said she was mouthy. Some said the Lord had finally sent the Wheeler place a woman with iron in her spine. And when the sheriff came with Henry Voss 3 days later, he found half the town already gathered by the fence, not out of kindness, but because public ruin is the one entertainment even decent people make time for. Clara had prepared for them all. She had the ledger from the grain buyer, receipts from the freight office, 2 witnesses from church who remembered Elias delivering cattle in lieu of payment, and 1 quiet old surveyor who had once taught her arithmetic. The hearing happened right there on the porch. Voss argued, blustered, threatened, and then, piece by piece, under Clara's steady reading and the surveyor's dry testimony, his claim split open like rotten fruit. The sheriff, embarrassed to have been used, warned Voss off the property and sent him back to town stripped of his swagger. And when the crowd drifted away disappointed by the lack of blood, Mrs. Harlan paused at the gate, looked at Clara with new measuring in her eyes, and said, "Perhaps you will make it to winter after all." But the valley had spoken too soon, because the hardest battles in a Western life are not fought on porches. They are fought in the rooms left after everyone goes home. Victory did not turn Elias gentle overnight. Grief still stalked him. Silence still took him for hours at a time. And on the first frost morning, Clara found him standing in the nursery that had never held a living child past 1 week, staring at the small rocker in the corner as if all his losses had gathered there to count themselves. She did not comfort him with sweet lies. Instead, she opened the window, let the cold rush in, and told him plain, "If you keep living with ghosts, you will join them before your body is done." Then she dragged the rocker into the yard, set it beside the woodpile, and asked whether he meant to burn it or mend it. Because mourning can hide inside a house so long, it starts to call itself loyalty. He chose to mend it. Not for a child, not yet, but because broken things deserved a second shape if they could bear one. Snow came late that year, after the wheat was in, after the cattle were counted, after the first clean laugh Clara ever heard from Elias slipped out by accident when she cursed a rooster vicious enough to deserve it. The house changed slowly. There were curtains now, and smoke rising at dawn, and 2 sets of tracks to the barn. The empty rooms no longer looked, waiting to be abandoned. They looked occupied, argued with, lived in. And when Christmas supper brought neighbors under their roof for the first time in years, even the old women who had sharpened prophecy on Clara's name had to admit the place no longer felt cursed. Only human, later, after the last guest had gone and moonlight silvered the pasture. Elias stood with Clara on the porch where she had first arrived, carrying all she owned in a single trunk. The valley below was still. The house behind them glowed warm through its windows. And he asked her, "What made you stay when everyone expected you to go?" Clara rested her hand on the rail, looked out over the fields that had cost them both so much, and answered, "Because empty houses lie, they make people think nothing can grow there. They make sorrow look permanent. They make fear sound like wisdom. But a house is only empty until someone decides to live all the way inside it and in the winter quiet, with the harvest safe, the debt beaten back, and the curse shriveled under the ordinary labor of two stubborn people refusing to quit." Mercy Ridge understood what it had mistaken all along. No bride had ever stayed past harvest because no one before Clara Belle had come to conquer the land. She had come to confront the grief inside the walls. And when she looked at the empty house and unpacked, she had done more than move in. She had dared the past to make room.